My wife cheated with our neighbor, and everyone on the street knew except me. For over a decade, I believed I lived in the perfect neighborhood. It was the kind of place people dream about: charming houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and friendly faces everywhere you turned. Our community had a warmth to it that made you feel like part of a big family. Lisa, my wife of 15 years, and I moved here right after our wedding. We built a life together, raised 2 beautiful kids, and became staples of the neighborhood. We were the kind of couple people looked at and said, "They've got it all figured out." At least, that's what I thought. The man who lived 2 doors down, James, was a fixture in our lives and the neighborhood's unofficial handyman. He was the kind of guy you could count on for anything: a burst pipe, a flat tire, or even just a friendly chat over the fence. As a single dad raising 2 boys, he had a charisma that drew people in, and everyone in the neighborhood adored him. I never had a reason to think twice about James. Sure, he was close with Lisa, closer than I might have preferred at times, but I brushed it off. Lisa was just friendly, and James was, well, James. I trusted her completely, but looking back now, I can see that trust blinded me to the signs that something wasn't right. The first real crack in my perfect world appeared during one of our neighborhood barbecues. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, the smell of burgers and hot dogs filling the air as kids ran around with popsicles in hand. James had brought his famous ribs, which everyone raved about. Lisa was helping him set up his food station, her laughter carrying across the yard as they joked about something I couldn't hear. At one point, I noticed the 2 of them standing a little too close, their heads bent together as they spoke. Lisa's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, jealousy flared in my chest, but I quickly pushed it aside. It was just a barbecue. They were just neighbors. Later that night, as we cleaned up, I asked Lisa about it casually. "What were you and James laughing about earlier?" She shrugged, her tone light. "Oh, nothing. He was just telling me some ridiculous story about work." Her answer seemed innocent enough, but something about her tone didn't sit right with me. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. A few weeks later, I was out jogging early in the morning when I passed a group of neighbors chatting near the park. As I approached, their conversation stopped abruptly, and they greeted me with overly cheerful smiles. "Morning," I said, nodding to them as I jogged past. "Morning," one of them replied quickly, her voice a little too high-pitched. As I ran on, I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been talking about me, or about Lisa. I brushed it off as paranoia, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Later that week, I overheard something at the grocery store that confirmed my worst fears. 2 women from the neighborhood were chatting in the produce aisle, their voices low but not low enough. "Lisa and James," one of them said, her tone dripping with judgment. "Can you believe it? Right under his nose." I froze, my hand hovering over a bag of apples. Were they talking about my Lisa? My James? As I rounded the corner, they spotted me and immediately fell silent. One of them gave me an awkward smile, then turned and walked away. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. Was it just petty gossip, or was there something more to it? I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the whispers wouldn't leave my mind. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention. I noticed Lisa's sudden interest in helping James with small tasks, dropping off groceries when he was busy, offering to babysit his boys so he could get some work done. One evening, she mentioned she was heading over to his house to help him fix something on his computer. I nodded, pretending not to care, but a knot of suspicion tightened in my chest. A couple of hours later, she came home, her face flushed, and her hair slightly tousled. She said nothing unusual had happened, but I caught a faint whiff of cologne on her clothes, cologne that wasn't mine. "Is that James's cologne?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She laughed, brushing it off. "Oh, probably. He hugged me goodbye, and I guess it rubbed off." Her explanation seemed plausible, but something about it felt wrong. The final straw came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had taken the day off work to catch up on errands and decided to surprise Lisa with her favorite lunch from a local cafe. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed James's truck parked out front. Curious, and a little uneasy, I let myself into the house. The kids were at school, and the house was quiet, except for the faint hum of voices coming from upstairs. I followed the sound, my heart pounding. As I approached the bedroom, I heard Lisa laughing, a soft, intimate laugh I hadn't heard in years. I pushed the door open to find her sitting on the bed with James, their heads close together as they looked at something on her laptop. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice shaking. Lisa jumped up, her face pale. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "James was just helping me with some work stuff." James stood quickly, avoiding my gaze. "I should get going," he muttered, brushing past me without another word. I turned to Lisa, my hands trembling. "Why was he in our bedroom?" "It's not what it looks like," she insisted, her voice defensive. "We needed a quiet place to work. That's all." Her words sounded hollow, and the guilt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. That evening, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Lisa," I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "I need you to tell me the truth. What's going on between you and James?" Her face crumpled, and she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It started a few months ago. I didn't mean for it to happen." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. For months, she'd been lying to me, sneaking around with James while I went about my days, oblivious. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How could you throw away 15 years for him?" She had no answer, just more tears and apologies. But nothing she said could undo the damage. After Lisa's tearful confession, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions that had no answers. How long had this been going on? Did James's boys know? Did our neighbors? The more I thought about it, the more humiliated I felt. Not only had my wife betrayed me, but it seemed like everyone else had been in on the secret except me. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Lisa had gone downstairs, but I could hear her voice. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I tiptoed down the stairs and stood just out of sight, straining to hear her words. "He knows now," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do, James. He's devastated. I'm devastated. This isn't how I wanted it to go." My stomach churned. She was already confiding in him, as if I didn't exist. I stepped into the kitchen, and she froze mid-sentence, her eyes wide. "Is that James?" I asked, my voice cold. She quickly hung up, fumbling with her phone. "It's not what you think," she stammered. "Stop lying to me, Lisa," I snapped. "I deserve the truth, all of it." For the next hour, she told me everything. How their affair had started after a neighborhood block party months ago. They had been drinking, talking about their struggles as parents, and one thing had led to another. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It had grown into something deeper, or so she claimed. "It didn't mean I stopped loving you," she said, tears streaming down her face. Her words felt like a slap. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said, my voice raw. As much as Lisa's betrayal stung, what hurt almost as much was the realization that the neighborhood, the same community I had trusted and cherished, had been complicit in her deceit. The whispers, the awkward silences, the knowing glances from neighbors, it all added up. The next day, I decided to confront someone I thought I could trust. Karen, who lived across the street, had always been kind and supportive. If anyone could give me some insight into what had been happening behind my back, it was her. I walked over and knocked on her door. When she answered, her face fell. "Oh, hey, Mark," she said, her voice hesitant. "I need to ask you something," I said, my tone firm. "Did you know about Lisa and James?" Her expression said it all. She looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't want to get involved," she said finally. "But, yes, I heard things. I saw things." "And you didn't think to tell me?" I asked, my voice rising. "You let me walk around like a fool while everyone else knew?" "Mark, I didn't know how to tell you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it wasn't my place. I'm so sorry." Her apology did little to soothe the anger and humiliation burning inside me. I left her porch feeling more isolated than ever. The hardest part of all was facing our children. At ages 10 and 13, They were old enough to sense that something was wrong but too young to fully understand the complexities of betrayal. Lisa and I agreed to sit them down together and explain as much as we could without giving them details they didn't need. As we sat in the living room, my daughter, Emily, looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" she asked. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. "We don't know yet," I said honestly. "But what's happening right now isn't your fault. We both love you and your brother very much." My son, Jake, looked angry. "Is this because of James?" he asked bluntly. The room fell silent. I hadn't realized he'd picked up on what was happening, but it was clear he had overheard something. "Why was Mom always at his house?" Jake pressed, his voice rising. "Is that why you're mad?" Lisa started to cry, and I had to fight back my own tears. "We're working through it," I said, my voice tight. "But you don't need to worry about that. We'll figure it out." Jake stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Emily curled up next to Lisa, trying to comfort her. I sat there, feeling like my world was crumbling in slow motion. I couldn't avoid James forever. The next time I saw him was at the grocery store. He was pushing a cart, his head down, clearly hoping to avoid me. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "James," I said, my voice sharp. He froze, then slowly turned to face me. "Mark," he said, his tone cautious. "Don't, Mark, me," I snapped. "You destroyed my family. You betrayed my trust. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" He looked genuinely ashamed, but his apology did little to cool my rage. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. It got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You slept with my wife, James. You lied to me, to your boys, to this entire neighborhood." He didn't have an answer, just a hollow apology that felt like an insult. I left the store, my hands trembling with anger. As weeks went by, the tension in our house became unbearable. Lisa and I tried to coexist for the sake of the kids, but every conversation ended in tears or shouting. The love we once shared felt like a distant memory, buried under layers of anger and betrayal. One night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Staying in the same house, pretending we could fix this, was slowly destroying me. The next morning, I told Lisa I needed to leave. "I can't heal if I'm here," I said. "I need space to figure out what's next." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said. I'm so sorry, Mark." I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it gave me the distance I needed to start rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, spent more time with the kids, and even started therapy to process everything I'd been through. The neighborhood I once loved became a place I avoided at all costs. I couldn't bear to see the faces of people who had known about the affair, who had whispered behind my back while I went on, blissfully unaware. Lisa and I eventually filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only path forward. Co-parenting with her was challenging, but we made it work for the sake of Emily and Jake. As for James, he moved away a few months after the affair came to light. His house sold quickly, and his boys went to live with their mother in another state. The neighborhood carried on, but it was never the same for me. I'm still figuring out how to move forward, how to trust again. Some days, I feel like I'll never get there. But other days, I catch a glimpse of hope. A reminder that this chapter of my life, painful as it was, isn't the end of my story.